People often take soil for granted, but it's an essential natural resource. It provides plants with water, nutrients, oxygen, and anchorage. It's home for a huge community of microorganisms, fungi, and animals. It may be the key to sequestering carbon and reducing or reversing climate change. Let's take a closer look at this valuable resource. This presentation is brought to you by King Garden Education
and Iron Bee Learning.
Let's begin by looking at the functions of soil. Soil sustains life above and below the surface. It helps to regulate water and dissolve particles. It filters, buffers pH, and detoxifies substances. In addition, soil stores and recycles nutrients. We build in soil, so it also provides support to structures. What is soil? It's a dynamic living ecosystem that consists of about 45% disintegrated rocks or minerals, about 25% is water, another 25% is air, and somewhere between 0.5 to 5% is organic matter. This consists of humus, which is dead stuff like leaf litter, dead bodies, waste, and so on, and also the living organisms that make up the soil community. Is soil a renewable or non-renewable resource? Soil is renewable, but it takes about 500 years to create an inch of topsoil through the process called pedogenesis.
How does soil form? Remember CLORPT. CL stands for climate, O for organisms, R for relief or topography of the area, P for parent material, and T for time.
Climate is a big factor in the formation of soil. An area that gets heavy rainfall will have much more weathering and form soil more quickly. Organisms also play a role. Abundant organic matter increases soil formation. Relief or topography also is a factor. In a hilly area, for example, there will be much more erosion and soil formation than in a flat place. Parent material is important because some rocks are harder than others. Sandstone, for example, will weather very quickly, while a hard rock like granite may take some time to break down into soil. All of the above factors affect the time it takes to form soil. Minerals make up almost half of most soils. Minerals are inorganic substances found naturally in the Earth's crust. They aren't made by living things, but living things need minerals. How does a rock break apart into the small particles that form soil? It's done through the processes of physical, chemical, and biological weathering. Physical weathering is done through the action of wind, water, ice, and other mechanical processes. When ice forms in the cracks in a rock, ice expands and breaks apart the rock. Chemical weathering also helps to break apart rock. For example, carbon dioxide in the air dissolves in water and forms carbonic acid, which dissolves the minerals in the rock. Biological weathering also occurs. For example, when tree roots grow through rock and grow larger, they expand and break apart the rock. Lichens also can cause biological weathering. Lichens are an association of fungi and algae, and they secrete acids that can dissolve the minerals in rock. Soil texture is based on the size of the particles that make up the soil. Sand particles are fairly large and can be seen with the naked eye. They range from about 0.05 to about 2 millimeters in diameter. Silt particles are smaller. They range from about 0.002 of a millimeter up to about 0.05. Clay particles are tiny and could be seen only with a microscope because they're less than 0.002 of a millimeter in diameter. It is possible to have a soil that is 100% sand or 100% clay, for example, but most soils are a mixture of different sized particles. This rather odd-looking diagram helps us determine what kind of soil we have based on the percentage of each type of soil particle. The ideal soil is loam, which is about 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay. How can you find out the texture of your soil? Well, you can do a simple jar test. You need a quart jar. You need to fill it about 1/3 full with soil, and then fill the rest of the jar almost to the top with water. Cap it securely and shake well, and then let the layers settle out. Sand, which is heavier, will quickly go to the bottom of the jar. After 2 minutes, you'll see the layer of sand. In about 2 hours, the silt particles should settle, but the clay particles will still remain in suspension. After about 24 hours, the clay particles should settle, and you'll be able to see distinct layers in the jar, indicating the percentage of each soil texture. After we have our percentages, we can use the soil texture diagram to determine the type of soil we have. It's about 20% clay, that's the orange line, about 30% silt, which is the yellow line, and 50% sand, the green line. So we're right on the border between sandy loam, loam, and sandy clay loam. We can classify it as sandy loam in this case. Soil texture is important because it affects water holding capacity and drainage, aeration, the workability of the soil, and several other properties. Coarse textured soils have a high percentage of sand, and the large particles leave large pore spaces. Because of that, sand has good aeration and it's loose and easy to work. Think of going to the beach and digging sand with a plastic shovel. However, the large pore spaces cause water to move through very quickly, so sand has poor water retention, and it also leaches out minerals very quickly. The sand particles don't have much surface area to hold the nutrients, and the nutrients quickly rush through. Fine-textured soils that have a high percentage of clay have tiny pore spaces and don't provide much room for air. They're notoriously difficult to work because when they're dry, they're hard like adobe. And when they're wet, they become thick and sticky, just like the clay in art class. Clay soils often are waterlogged because they retain water and release it to plants very slowly. They also tend to stay cold much longer into the season. The one good thing about clay soil is they do hold nutrients. Medium textured soils include silt and loams, which have all three types of particles. Loam has sand particles, clay particles, and silt particles. It has good water retention but does drain. It has good aeration, and the tiny particles help hold nutrients. Soil structure refers to the way that particles of soil clump or aggregate together to create a system of large and small pores for air and water to pass through. Clumping or aggregation is often the result of waste from organisms, which acts like a superglue for aggregating the soil particles. Otherwise, the soil would be like powder. Good structure increases water infiltration, the downward movement of water through soil. Soil can become compacted, which is a compression of the soil. It reduces the volume of the soil's pores and reduces aeration and infiltration of water. Compaction often occurs when people walk on soil or drive heavy equipment on it. Another thing that we look at with soil is soil pH. Most soils have a pH somewhere between 4 to 8. And although plants vary, most plants grow best in a slightly acidic soil that has a pH of about 6.5. pH is important because it affects the solubility of the nutrients. That refers to whether the nutrients are dissolved and available to the plants. Highly acidic soils tend to dissolve the nutrients more quickly, and as a result, they can leach out and aren't available to the plants. We also look at soil cation exchange capacity, CEC. Remember that a cation is a positively charged particle. Many nutrients like calcium, potassium, and magnesium have a positive charge. They're going to be attracted to particles of soil that have a negative charge. Clay and humus and soils with higher pH have a higher negative charge on the particles, and as a result, they have a higher cation exchange capacity. In other words, they're better at holding on to these positively charged nutrients like calcium and potassium. And because they're holding on to the nutrients are less likely to leach out or wash away. You'll see that soils often have different colors, and the primary reason they have different colors is because of the parent material. If the rocks that form the soil are reddish, then the soil will be relatively red. If the rocks are more of a light color, the soil will also be fairly light. Overall, though, we see that organic matter tends to make soil darker. Reddish soil may be a sign that the soil is high in iron and essentially is rusting. And sometimes if you see gray or kind of a sick yellow-brown soil, it may indicate poor drainage. Let's take a closer look at the organic matter in soil. Humus, you'll remember, is the dead stuff. It consists of leaf litter, waste of organisms, decomposing organisms, and so on. It provides food for the living organisms in the soil. A healthy soil community with a great deal of organic matter will have trillions of organisms. Remember the FBI: fungi, bacteria, and invertebrates. Humus is the base of the food chain. The dead plants provide food for consumers. The rule is the greater amount of organic matter in the soil, the greater diversity and biomass in the soil community. In 1 square meter of a good healthy soil, there is an astonishingly large number of different organisms, including trillions of bacteria. Many of these are beneficial and will help plants grow. If you take a look at an area where someone dug down into the soil, you'll be able to see a soil profile, which consists of horizons. This is a cross-section of the soil. A soil profile has distinct layers or horizons. The topmost layer is the O horizon. It's the surface that has a lot of organic matter that hasn't decomposed yet, including leaves, twigs, dead roly-polies, and so on. The next horizon is the A horizon or topsoil, which usually has a lot of organic matter. This is where plant roots grow. Below that, we see the B horizon or subsoil, which doesn't have much organic matter or nutrients. Next, we see the C horizon or parent material. And below that, we see the R horizon or bedrock, which is unweathered parent material. Some areas that get a lot of rainfall may have an E horizon, a zone of leaching. The heavy rainfall quickly washes away nutrients which leach into the water. Many human activities degrade and erode soil. Farming is one of the major reasons for soil degradation, especially when industrialized agriculture is practiced, Overgrazing of animals also causes erosion. Cutting forests, deforestation removes the vegetation and allows greater erosion. Building roads, off-road vehicles, and mining also expose the soil and increase degradation and erosion. Organic matter in soil stores carbon. Modern industrialized agriculture does not return much organic matter to the soil, and soils around the world have been degraded. By reversing this process and adding more organic matter to soil, the soil can act as a carbon sink. It can store huge amounts of carbon and can reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's estimated that soils can sequester more than 10% of the anthropogenic emissions, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and have a real impact on reducing climate change.